In Proverbs 27, God said, "The spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all his innermost parts." Something has been stirring in the unseen realm, and it didn't start today. Before you clicked this video, before these words reached your ears, there was already movement around you. A quiet tension, a subtle pressure in your chest, almost like your spirit was leaning forward, listening. Listen this. That sensation you felt wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Something just shifted, not outside of you, but around you. A quiet movement you couldn't explain. A subtle pressure in the air, as if the room grew heavier for a moment, then lighter, as if time itself paused, just long enough for heaven to look directly at you. This is not random that you're here. Before you dismiss that thought, listen carefully. In Zechariah 13:9, God said, "Not refine them like silver and test them like gold." There are moments when the spiritual realm leans close to the natural world, not loudly, not violently, but with a hush so deep it makes your heart listen instead of your ears. This is one of those moments, because somewhere you couldn't see, your name was spoken, not in anger, not in judgment, but in urgency. And urgency in heaven is never without reason. You may feel it already. That strange mixture of exhaustion and expectancy. Like you've been walking uphill for a long time, carrying something heavy you never asked for, yet refusing to set it down. Nights where your body rests but your spirit stays awake. Days where you smile on the outside while something inside you remains alert. Watchful, waiting. Have you felt that? There's a reason your life hasn't unfolded like everyone else's. A reason your path has been narrower, quieter, lonelier at times. A reason the storms didn't destroy you, but they also didn't miss you. But God rarely begins with elevation. He begins with pressure. This story doesn't begin with triumph. It begins with pressure. Not the kind that breaks bones, but the kind that tests substance. You see, long before anything visible changed, there was an unseen evaluation taking place. Not of your words, not of your image, not even of your actions when people were watching. It was deeper than that. It was about who you were becoming in the shadows. While others learned how to perform goodness, you were being taught how to carry it. While others learned when to speak, you learned when to remain silent. While others were celebrated early, you were delayed, protected from applause that would have crushed you before you were ready. And you didn't even know that's what was happening. There were moments when life treated you unfairly, undeniably unfairly. You were misunderstood, misjudged, sometimes outright betrayed. And what made it worse was this: you could have become bitter and no one would have blamed you. You had permission to harden. You had justification to retaliate. You had every excuse to change, but something in you refused. Not loudly, not heroically, quietly. You kept your integrity when it cost you comfort. You kept your compassion when it brought you pain. You kept your honesty when silence would have protected you. And every time you did, something shifted in places you couldn't see. Have you ever wondered why the attacks felt so personal? Why the resistance seemed calculated? Why certain battles repeated themselves as if something or someone was studying you? What felt like attack was actually attention. It wasn't coincidence. It was observation. There is a difference between a single good moment and a sustained way of being. Anyone can rise once under the right conditions. Anyone can look pure when the environment is friendly. But very few can remain uncorrupted when circumstances actively work against them, and that is what caught heaven's attention. Not because you were perfect, but because you were consistent under fire. There was a moment, one you never witnessed, when the atmosphere changed. A moment when the usual noise stopped. Accusations halted mid-sentence. Patterns that had always worked suddenly failed. Silence fell where noise had ruled. Not because the opposition grew weaker, but because it ran out of arguments. You see, darkness knows how to exploit moments. It knows how to point to mistakes, highlight flaws, exaggerate failures, but it cannot refute a character that endures unchanged through years of pressure. It cannot explain restraint without reward. It cannot decode kindness without applause. It cannot manipulate a heart that refuses to rot. And when something cannot be explained, it must be acknowledged. That's when the tension began, because what you didn't realize is this: Your quiet resilience was not just personal, it disrupted systems. It challenged hierarchies. It forced a response. There are times when heaven observes. At times when heaven observes. And there are times when heaven intervenes. This was the second kind. Have you noticed how certain dangers narrowly missed you? How situations that should have destroyed you somehow collapsed before reaching you? How people who intended harm lost interest, lost access, or lost ground? Protection often disguises itself as randomness. You called it luck. You called it coincidence. You called it timing. But it was something else entirely. It was containment. There was a realization that your inner state could not be allowed to erode further under constant assault. Not because you are fragile, but because what you carry is rare, and rarity must be guarded. Right now, you may be standing in a strange in-between space, not where you used to be, but not yet where you sense you're heading. Old doors no longer open easily. New ones haven't fully revealed themselves. Conversations feel different. Desires are shifting. Even your prayers sound quieter, but deeper. Confusion is noisy. What you're feeling now is precise. That's not confusion. That's recalibration. Have you felt less drawn to noise lately? Less interested in proving yourself? Oh, less willing to explain your heart to people who only want access, not understanding? That's not withdrawal. That's refinement. You are being repositioned without being rushed. Strengthened without being hardened. Prepared without being exposed. And here is the twist you didn't expect. Shu didn't expect. The very thing that made your journey difficult, your refusal to become cold, is the reason protection intensified around you. What others saw as weakness registered as credibility. What others mocked as softness was recorded as strength under pressure. Your restraint spoke louder than rebellion ever could. Your silence carried more weight than shouting. Your steadiness became evidence. This is why things are changing now. Not suddenly, but unmistakably. Why the atmosphere around you feels alert. Why certain truths are surfacing without you chasing them. Why your intuition feels sharper, your discernment clearer, your tolerance for distortion lower. You are not being pushed forward. You are being cleared forward. And in this clearing, something important is about to be revealed. But not yet. Not all at once. Because what's coming requires context, it requires grounding, it requires you to understand that what protected you before was only the beginning. Take a breath here. Let this settle. Because the next phase is not about surviving pressure, it's about understanding why it was allowed in the first place, and that understanding is closer than you think. The pressure didn't come to destroy you. It came to expose something that couldn't be seen any other way. There are layers to the unseen world, and not everything is revealed at once. Some truths are too heavy to be dropped suddenly. They must be approached slowly, like eyes adjusting to light after a long darkness. That's why the explanation never came when the pain was fresh. That's why clarity waited until endurance was proven, because what you were facing wasn't random resistance, it was assessment. While you were trying to understand why life felt unusually demanding, a silent measurement was taking place, not of your strength, but of your inner posture. How you carried yourself when no one corrected you. How you responded when no reward followed obedience. How you treated others when doing so offered no advantage. You were being watched, but not in the way fear imagines. This wasn't surveillance to accuse, it was observation to confirm. Have you ever noticed how the most difficult seasons came right after moments when you chose restraint instead of reaction? How the heat intensified not when you failed, but when you stayed true. That's not punishment, that's pressure revealing quality. There is a truth rarely spoken out loud. Not everyone who walks in light is immediately lifted. Some are first concealed, not hidden in shame, but hidden in safety. Because premature exposure would have distorted what was still forming. You were one of those. That's why opportunities sometimes passed you by that looked perfect on paper. Why recognition arrived late. Why applause was delayed even when effort was sincere. You weren't being overlooked, you were being preserved. There are forces that don't fear loud goodness, they fear quiet consistency. Quiet consistency. Because noise can be distracted, moments can be manipulated, but a steady inner compass cannot be negotiated with. That's when opposition became strategic, not obvious, not dramatic, subtle. Personal, targeted, misunderstandings where clarity should have existed, delays where momentum was expected. Isolation in rooms full of people, not enough to break you, just enough to test whether you would fracture internally, and still you didn't. You bent, you questioned, you wept in private, but you did not rot. That is where the tension escalated. Because when resistance fails to change the core, it must change tactics. Have you ever wondered why temptation showed up disguised as relief? Why shortcuts appeared during exhaustion? Why certain exits looked reasonable, even logical, when you were most tired? Those weren't escapes. They were invitations to abandon your inner standard. And every time you declined, sometimes consciously, sometimes instinctively, something unseen recorded it, not as moral superiority, as stability. There came a moment when the usual patterns stopped working. Accusations lost traction. Old narratives didn't stick. Even the voices that once criticized you grew strangely quiet or confused. That silence wasn't peace. It was recalculation, because something was becoming undeniable. Your inner state could not be leveraged. Pain didn't buy you. Delay didn't bribe you. Loneliness didn't hollow you out the way it was expected to. You didn't emerge flawless. You emerged intact. And that is dangerous to systems that depend on corruption to function. This is where the unseen conversation shifted, not with thunder, not with spectacle, with authority. A recognition that what was forming in you was no longer just personal development. It was becoming a stabilizing presence, a kind of weight that alters environments simply by existing within them. Have you noticed how people tell you things they don't usually share? How tension eases or rises when you enter a space. How truth seems to surface around you without you asking for it. That's not imagination. That's influence without force. And influence like that demands a response. So protection increased, not visibly, but precisely. Situations rearranged themselves timing bent, outcomes softened, not because danger vanished, but because intervention began intercepting it earlier. You were no longer being tested to see if you'd change. You were being guarded so you wouldn't have to. This is where the story turns. Because protection is not just defense, it's assignment preparation. You weren't shielded to remain small. You were shielded because what you carry cannot afford contamination. Not now, not at this stage. That's why your sensitivity sharpened. A sudden loss of interest in something that would have compromised your integrity later. You may have thought you were losing opportunities. In reality, you were being spared from entanglements because your role is not to blend in. It's to stabilize. And stabilizers are rarely flashy. They don't announce themselves. They simply prevent collapse by being present. That's why people feel safe around you without knowing why. Why conversations deepen unexpectedly. Why truth emerges when you're near. You carry an atmosphere that invites honesty, and honesty is disruptive. It dismantles illusions without aggression. It exposes false structures simply by existing. That's why, without trying, you've become a mirror. People see themselves more clearly around you. And not everyone likes what they see, so some drift away, some grow distant. Some misunderstand you deliberately. Let them. Their reaction is not a verdict on you. It's a response to what your presence activates within them. This is also why your circle has been narrowing. Not because you're meant to be alone, but because your next season requires resonance, not proximity. Alignment, not availability, and alignment is rare. You may have wondered why connections that once felt natural now feel strained, why certain dynamics no longer flow, why you feel out of place in environments that used to feel familiar. That's because you've outgrown the frequency, not the people. Growth doesn't always require separation due to conflict. Sometimes it happens quietly, through incompatibility, and that's okay. You're not abandoning anyone. You're honoring the evolution that was paid for with years of unseen endurance. Now here is the turning point most people never realize is happening. The moment stability becomes consistent, responsibility increases. Not burdens, but influence. Your choices now ripple further than before. Your restraint matters more. Your words carry more weight. Your silence shapes outcomes. Well, that's why you've been feeling more intentional lately, even when you can't explain why. Why careless decisions feel uncomfortable? Why rushing feels wrong? You're no longer being shaped for survival. You're being shaped for stewardship, and stewardship requires awareness. This is where the unseen realm shifts from observation to cooperation. Guidance becomes clearer, timing becomes sharper, intuition becomes reliable, not because you became special overnight, but because you proved faithful with inner alignment over time. That kind of reliability invites partnership. And partnership requires trust. So what you're experiencing now, this subtle reordering, this quiet clarity, this internal calm mixed with anticipation, is not an ending. It's authorization to move forward without fear of collapse. Authorization to step into environments that once intimidated you. Authorization to carry insight without needing validation. You don't need to announce who you are. Your presence will do the announcing, and the next phase won't demand that you strive harder. It will ask that you remain steady while things around you accelerate. That's why rest is becoming important. Why peace feels necessary. Why your spirit resists unnecessary struggle. You're entering a stretch where alignment matters more than effort. But there is still one more layer to uncover. Because stabilization is only the foundation, what comes next is exposure not of you, but of what surrounds you. Truths rising, masks slipping, structures revealing their cracks, and you will not need to confront any of it. You will simply stand. And in standing, things will either align or fall away. This is not something you force, it's something you witness. And when it begins, and it already has, you'll realize that everything you endured was not about making you strong. It was about making you unshakable. And unshakable people don't chase change. Change reorganizes itself around them. Capacity for responsibility, which leads us to the next layer, because increased capacity attracts opportunity, but also scrutiny. Not everyone will understand the change in you. Some will sense it and feel unsettled. Others will misinterpret your calm as distance, your clarity as judgment. Let them misunderstand. You are not required to explain your evolution to those who only knew your survival. You don't owe familiarity to anyone who refuses to grow with you. And here's something important to remember. Your quiet confidence is not arrogance. Your boundaries are not rejection. And your selectivity is not selfishness. They are signs of self-respect earned through experience. And those who recognize that will gravitate toward you naturally. These connections will feel different. Less dramatic, more mutual, less intense, but more real. Conversations will feel grounding instead of draining. Support will feel balanced instead of transactional. These are not accidental encounters. They are reflections of your internal alignment, externalizing. Now let me ask you something deeply. Do you feel like you're standing at the edge of something, but not rushing toward it? Like you're aware change is coming, but you're no longer desperate for it to arrive? That's readiness, not impatience, not complacency, readiness. And readiness carries a quiet confidence that doesn't need reassurance. This is where life begins responding to you instead of testing you. Small confirmations appear, synchronicities increase, right place, right timing moments happen more often. Not because you're forcing alignment, but because you've become congruent. Congruence creates flow, and flow feels effortless compared to the resistance you once knew. But don't mistake ease for insignificance. What's unfolding now is subtle, but foundational. You are becoming someone others can rely on, not because you have all the answers, but because you remain steady in uncertainty. That steadiness is rare, and rare qualities attract responsibility, which is why soon you'll notice people seeking your input more, trusting your perspective, leaning on your calm when there's wavers. Not because you ask for influence, but because influence recognizes maturity, and maturity doesn't announce itself, it's felt. Now, before this next stage fully reveals itself, there's one more internal shift happening. You're learning when not to intervene. You're realizing that not every problem is yours to solve. Not every conflict requires your energy. Not every situation deserves your insight. Discernment is teaching you restraint, and restraint protects your clarity. This restraint is what will allow you to move into what's next without burnout, bitterness, or compromise. Because the next chapter doesn't require more effort. It requires presence. And presence is something you now carry naturally. You are no longer becoming strong. You are becoming reliable. Reliable in character, reliable in awareness, reliable in stillness. And that reliability is what allows what's coming to trust you. Because what's coming carries weight, and only those who can remain grounded while carrying weight are invited forward. You don't need to hurry. You don't need to prove anything. You are already positioned, and the final unfolding, the part that makes everything clear, is closer than you think.